They said it was going to be just another overnight hike, something the counselors called the Trailfire Trek, a traditional send-off for the most spirited campers during the final week at Camp Redwood in the summer of 1999. The woods were dense that year, greener than usual, the trees holding the moisture of 100 mountain storms, and the sky on July 17th was wrapped in a humid blue that made the air heavy even at dawn. Cabin 3 and Cabin 4 had been selected, 17 kids in total, ages 10 to 13, most of them already half-packed before breakfast with snacks, water canteens, emergency whistles, and journals full of doodles and summer secrets. They were led by Counselor Jeremy, a soft-spoken college kid with long hair and a clipboard he always kept under his arm. He was the type that kids trusted without quite knowing why. His voice was calm, and he never raised it. That morning, he called out their names one by one as the kids formed a loose line by the trailhead, joking and elbowing each other, unaware that this would be the last time their names would be spoken aloud by anyone who knew them. Natalie Boyd, age 12, twin braids, and a nervous smile. Caleb Vale, 11, quiet, hands always in his pockets. Maddie Rose, 13, tall for her age and always volunteering first. The others, Thomas K., Eric, Daniela, Hart, Gwyn, Sims, Ford, Ellis, Delcourt, Becker, and more, names that would eventually become chiseled into stone, hollowed out in yearbooks, and tucked away in cold files with a stamp. Missing, presumed deceased. At 9:18 a.m., the hike began. Jeremy led them north past the main trail, up toward the ridgeline. A few junior counselors waved them off with Polaroid cameras. The pictures would show up later, blurry from movement, most of the kids smiling, a few of them squinting at something just out of frame. By 4 p.m., the camp kitchen began prepping dinner. By 6:30, a heavy wind kicked up from the east, strong enough to knock a rowboat loose at the lakeshore. By 8 o'clock, when the group had still not returned, Camp Director Hannah Linfield radioed the local park authorities, saying the hike was overdue. She was calm. She'd done this before. They probably took the long loop, she said. They always forget the time. But by 10:12, when searchers reached the designated campfire ring on the hill and found not a single footprint or piece of disturbed earth, the air shifted. Something was wrong. There were no dropped granola bars, no broken twigs, no sign of a fire, just a dead flashlight with low batteries, laying perfectly centered on a patch of dry moss. The trail markers showed no signs of being followed. The forest was too quiet. At midnight, rangers expanded the search zone. Floodlights were flown in. Dogs barked at nothing. Helicopters swept the nearby glades. The woods gave up nothing. Nothing except for the backpacks. All 17 of them. Neatly arranged, like an offering, in front of the one cabin no one ever went near, Cabin 6. The old building had been condemned in the mid-'80s after a foundation collapse, its back wall tilted at an angle, its roof half sunk, its interior boarded shut from the inside. But there they were, 17 bags, each with name tags, water bottles still full, sunscreen bottles unopened, and journals zipped inside. Jeremy's clipboard was never found.
No footprints led to the cabin. No fingerprints on the boards. Only dust. Only silence. The official story changed 3 times. First, they blamed an unexpected storm. Then, a flash flood in a remote canyon. Then finally, in the fall of that year, the report quietly marked the case closed, probable misadventure, presumed deceased. Environmental disorientation, no foul play suspected. Bodies, none. Evidence, classified. Camp Redwood was dissolved by the following spring. Its land was sold off in lots, the trail rerouted, and the area behind Cabin 6 fenced and labeled contaminated. A small memorial was added just outside the old lodge, a plaque with the names, a cheap pine bench, and a tree sapling that never grew. But the whispers never stopped, not in the town, not among the families, not in the corners of internet forums that still flickered with theories about what happened in the woods that day. And in 2024, a quarter century later, someone stirred the ashes. It began with a photo, mailed without a return address to Nora Vale, a former junior counselor who had left Camp Redwood 3 weeks before the disappearance. She hadn't thought of that place in years. But when she opened the envelope and saw the image, 17 kids lined up in front of the mess hall, identical to one she remembered seeing in the final week of camp, something wasn't right. It wasn't the composition. It wasn't the smiling faces. It was the background. Because behind them, behind the wall where the old tool shed used to be, stood a shadow that had no source. Tall. Elongated. As if a person had been standing there watching. But the tool shed had been torn down in 1996. And whoever, or whatever, that figure was, it wasn't in any of the copies that still existed in the camp archives. On the back of the photo, a scrawl of childlike handwriting read, "We never left." Not really. Nora froze. Because she recognized that handwriting. It belonged to her brother, Caleb. She'd seen it on birthday cards. On school projects. On the corner of the name tag he'd worn on his last day alive. And taped to the corner of the photo was a half-burnt piece of that tag. The same curve of the letter V. The same pen. The same burn mark. She hadn't even known it had survived. She'd buried the memory of that summer so deep that even her therapist hadn't gotten to it. But now, it was all back, like a wound that never healed. Within hours, Nora began collecting what was left. News clippings. Maps. Testimonies. Photographs. She contacted the county office. Found the original deed for the camp. Found who owned the land now. Most of it had been sold to a real estate group that specialized in recovery properties, meaning places that had seen disaster or controversy. But the parcel that included Cabin 6 hadn't been touched. Still marked, Federal Oversight, Access Restricted. She dug deeper. Found an acronym tied to the property's zoning tag, RON, Redwood Environmental Observation Node. Not a camp. Not a retreat. A testing ground. That night, Nora packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and her old camp sweater. She drove up to the old service road, now barely drivable, with trees leaning overhead like eavesdropping giants. She passed the rotted sign, Camp Redwood, where memories grow, and parked near the tree lean. The wind howled, but not in gusts, more like a steady groan, as if something beneath the ground had exhaled. She walked past the ruined cabins, eyes scanning for signs of movement. Cabin 1 was gone. Cabin 2 half burned. But Cabin 6. Still standing. Tilted. Shadowed. And strangely, clean. No moss. No ivy. No insects. Just stillness. She approached slowly, her flashlight cutting through the dusk. The front door remained boarded. But behind the cabin, partially hidden beneath the roots of an old pine, she found something else. A mound of concrete. Flat. Rusted. A hatch. She dropped to her knees and brushed away the dirt, heart pounding. The engraving was faint, RON, 6 access point B. She pried it open with her crowbar. It squealed like something waking up after a long, long sleep. Cold air rose from below. Dry. Artificial. She pointed her light downward. There were stairs. Concrete. Slick with age. She hesitated, but only for a second. Then she descended. 10 steps. 20. Then a corridor. The smell was antiseptic. The walls metal. The floor sloped slightly down. She passed signs marked, Chamber A, intake unit, memory loop testing, trial 12. Then she saw it, a door ajar, with a flickering light inside. She stepped through. And there, lined on the wall, were 17 photographs. Children. Campers. Each dated July 17, 1999. Each labeled by hand. Natalie Boyd. Caleb Vale. Eric Thomas. Maddie Rose. All of them. None had aged. Their faces stared back at her, some smiling. Some not. Below the photos, a voice recorder sat, its battery light blinking. She pressed play. A child's voice whispered, "We walked. But we never got anywhere." It looped. Every night. Every night. We tried to leave. But the trees closed. The hum got louder. We're still in it. We're still here. Nora staggered back. Her flashlight flickered. Something clicked deeper in the corridor. The light overhead went dark. And something moved behind her. Nora didn't remember turning around, didn't remember running, didn't even remember where her flashlight went, just the feeling of her breath catching halfway up her throat and the cold, concrete floor slapping beneath her boots as she bolted back toward the hatch behind cabin 6, the flickering lights dying one by one in her wake, until the last echo of her steps became swallowed by that thing she could not name, the silence that chased her. She reached the stairs, flung herself up them, and slammed the hatch shut behind her with a metallic bang that shuddered into the trees. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, trembling under a bruised sky, the smell of rust still in her lungs and something far older clinging to her jacket, like damp air soaked in memory. Whatever that place was, it had been built, not found. Designed. A place that had existed long before the disappearance was ever accidental. Back in her car, Nora gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, the recorder she'd swiped from the bunker pressed between her leg and the seat. She listened again. The child's voice repeated itself, but each time she played it back, it felt longer. Different words. Or perhaps just a different tone. We walked. But we never got anywhere. It looped. Every night. The trees changed. We changed. She hit pause, hands shaking. These weren't hallucinations. They weren't memories. They were recordings, captured and catalogued, meant for someone, not for her. She opened the glove box and retrieved her USB drive, backed up the file, and then, without breathing, she drove. Not to her apartment. Not to the police. But to the only person who still believed her brother might be alive, their old school librarian, Mr. Henry Cale. A recluse now, living in a retirement village in Rutland, he had once told her, during her sophomore year, disappearances like that don't happen by accident. They happen by design. At the time, she'd thought it was grief talking. Now, she knew it was knowledge. Henry answered the door in a flannel robe and slippers, blinking into the porch light like a man who hadn't seen the night sky in years. But his face changed when he saw her. "It's time, isn't it?" he asked. She nodded. Inside, surrounded by dusty books and maps of Redwood County, Henry listened. He didn't interrupt, just poured her tea and stared at the cassette recorder when she played the voice. "That's chamber audio," he said. A failed program from the late 80s, RON. Stood for Recursive Environmental Observation Network. They claimed it was a weather thing. It wasn't. They were building temporal studies, loops. Memory loops. Artificial reconstructions of familiar landscapes, designed to contain emotional signatures. Children were chosen because they were more adaptable. Less likely to question the shift. Nora stared at him, disbelieving. "You're saying the woods were a test site?" "Worse," he said, gently. "A mirror. A simulated copy of the woods. Looping time. A perfect trap. And those kids? They were the test. Nora remembered the trail signs. How nothing had looked changed. How the smell had shifted from pine to something clinical. And the photos, 17 copies, dated the day they vanished. Frozen. Preserved. Or worse, still trapped inside. But why? She asked. Henry stood and shuffled to a drawer, pulling out an old folder marked BetaRON/6. Inside were documents, some redacted, others just faded. One memo stood out: subjects remain psychologically active. Simulation loops holding. Memory drift within acceptable range. Terminate session 12 if vocal artifacts increase. Nora pointed to the line. Vocal artifacts. Voices leaking through, Henry said. Fragments of the loop bleeding back into real time. That's what you heard. The message. It's not playback. It's live. Someone's still in there. Someone's still speaking. Nora sat frozen. The voice. Caleb, her brother. Still speaking, after 25 years. Still waiting to be heard. She drove home in silence, the recorder in her lap, replaying the message until the words became etched into the walls of her memory. She didn't sleep. She barely breathed. And the next morning, she sent a message to a journalist she'd found while researching RON online, Elias Boone, a man with a reputation for chasing down classified cold cases. Meet me at Camp Redwood, she typed. You'll see why. He replied 3 hours later. Driving now. Don't go back in alone. But she already had. And she already knew. The truth wasn't inside cabin 6. It was beneath it. Beneath all of them. So she returned, this time with tools, flares, ropes, portable scanners, and a fresh recorder. She parked farther up the road, left her phone in the car, and descended into the hatch again. This time, it wasn't as dark. Something had changed. The corridor lights flickered with intermittent power. The air was cooler. A low hum echoed through the metal walls, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. She passed signs labeled Observation Bay Beta, Temporal Sync Station, and Holding Pod B. Each room had windows like hospital viewing bays. Each one was dark. Except for one. The last room on the left. Inside, 17 beds. And on each bed, a motionless figure. Nora staggered backward, her flashlight dropping. The faces were visible through the glass. Kids. Her age when they vanished. Caleb. Maddie. Natalie. All of them. But they didn't look old. They didn't look aged. They looked paused, as if time itself had been held in place. Their eyes were closed. 4 tubes ran into their arms. Wires into their temples. Nora's stomach turned. She pressed her hand to the glass. Caleb, she whispered. His eyes didn't open. But the lights flickered. The hum grew louder. And then, somewhere behind her, a door opened. Not a mechanical door. A wooden one. One that shouldn't be there. A slow creaking sound, like a cabin door on rusted hinges. She turned. There was nothing. But the corridor had changed. The metal had warped. Trees. Branches. Dirt floor. The corridor was no longer a corridor, it was a trail. The same trail. The one they had vanished from. She stepped forward, flashlight dimming, air growing warmer. The trail curved. Up ahead, she saw them. The kids, walking in a line. 17 of them. Same backpacks. Same pace. No sound. No birds. No wind. Just the crunch of leaves. And at the front of the line. Jeremy. The counselor. Clipboard in hand. He turned slowly. Smiled. eyes hollow. And vanished. The kids disappeared behind him. The trail faded. And Nora stood alone again, in the corridor, the hum now pounding like a scream. She ran. She didn't remember how she reached the hatch, only that when she surfaced, the woods were still. No sound. No wind. She stumbled back to the car, started the engine, and checked her USB. The file had changed. New audio. This time, not Caleb. A girl's voice. We're not asleep. We're just waiting. Someone has to remember. You opened it. You saw. Nora sent the files to Elias. But there was no reply. Only static. Only silence. And the next morning, news broke that a fire had destroyed the local forestry office that housed the original RON plans. Arson. No suspects. No survivors. No records. Again. As if something, someone, was erasing every trace. Nora stared at the news report, then at her phone. The voice echoed again, we're just waiting. You saw. She packed her things, locked her apartment, and wrote one last note, if I don't return, the trail does. Follow the hum. Beneath the pines, the silence remembers. If you're listening to the hum too, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Rain came the next morning, soft at first, then harder, as if the sky, too, had grown tired of silence. It slicked the pine bark black and turned the gravel path leading to cabin 6 into a thin trail of reflected light. Nora stood at the tree lean again, soaked to the knees, her satchel cinched shut, the recorder on loop in her jacket pocket, humming that voice again and again, we're not asleep. We're just waiting. You opened it. You saw. She hadn't heard back from Elias Boone in 3 days. His number rang without tone. His email bounced. His last message was a photo, a blurry screenshot of an old ski mat. Time-stamped and annotated. The subject line simply read, Redwood 6 schematic confirms it. There's a secondary chamber beneath the chamber. You haven't reached the bottom. And then nothing. She tried not to read into that. She tried to ignore the way the woods had shifted again. Like the layout was, breathing. Trees she'd passed before had new scars. Carvings she didn't remember, dates etched into bark. 1999, 2024. Overlapping. As if time was folding in on itself. She stepped into the clearing with slow, steady breaths. Cabin 6 loomed, half-collapsed now, with moss choking its window frames and vines crawling up through the floorboards. But she didn't go inside. She went behind it. To the hatch. Again. The rain had washed the leaves from the edges, revealing more, another hinge, another set of bolts, but also a symbol she hadn't seen before, a circle inside a triangle, scrawled in faded red. She traced it with a gloved finger. The same shape had been on one of the folders from the RON documents. Not a company logo. Not a safety marking. It was a warning. Or a lock. Or maybe both. Nora descended again. 3rd time. This time, no fear. Just resolve. She passed the chamber. The corridor. The glass room with the 17 still forms. She didn't look through the glass this time. She couldn't. Caleb's face haunted her in the shadows of every blinking red light. She kept going. There was another door this time. One that had not been opened before. It was rusted, marked RON/Project Echo in yellow paint so faded it looked like bone. She placed her hand on it. It felt warm. She pushed. And it opened. Inside was silence. Not just quiet, absence. Sound didn't exist in that room. Not the scuff of her boots. Not the hum of her recorder. Not even her breath. It was as if the room swallowed presence. In the center stood a single object, a circular platform, no larger than a dinner table, wires splayed out from beneath it like roots. Project Echo. She remembered Henry Cale's words. A mirror. A loop. Built from memory signatures. She took a step forward. The platform flickered. And then she wasn't in the room anymore. She was in the woods. Redwood. Only, it wasn't now. The sun was brighter. The cabins cleaner. She saw kids. Laughing. Running. 17 of them. Including Caleb. 12 years old. Backpack on. A flashlight dangling from his hand. She screamed his name but no sound came out. The loop was visual. Not auditory. She wasn't really there. Just an echo. The scene played out like film. Jeremy, the counselor, called them over. Clipboard in hand. He didn't look the same as in the newspaper photos. His eyes were too still. Too knowing. The kids followed him into the woods. The trail began. Nora followed too, breathless. And then something shifted. The light dimmed. The shadows grew longer. And she realized they were no longer walking through Redwood, not really. It looked like Redwood. Smelled like it. But the trees repeated. Like someone had copied and pasted the same few square yards endlessly. Even the kids noticed. Maddie whispered to Caleb, "We've already passed that log." They stopped. But Jeremy didn't. He walked straight ahead. Into the trees. And vanished. The kids panicked. Ran in different directions. One by one, they hit something. A wall. A barrier. Invisible but unyielding. They screamed. Nora watched helplessly as they pressed their palms against the air, shouting for help, for each other, until their voices went quiet. One by one, the lights in the loop dimmed. Until only Caleb remained. And he sat, knees to his chest, flashlight clutched in hand. Then the loop reset. Everything blurred. The sun returned. The kids laughed. And it all began again. Nora staggered backward, and found herself back in the chamber. On the platform. Heart racing. The silence lifted. Her recorder was still humming in her pocket. This time, a new voice. A man. Calm. Cold. If you're hearing this, you've breached unauthorized echo memory containment. Walking in a line. 17 of them. Same backpacks. Same pace. No sound. No birds. No wind. Just the crunch of leaves. And at the front of the line. Jeremy. The counselor. Clipboard in hand. He turned slowly. Smiled. Eyes hollow. And vanished. The kids disappeared behind him. The trail faded. And Nora stood alone again, in the corridor, the hum now pounding like a scream. She ran. She didn't remember how she reached the hatch, only that when she surfaced, the woods were still. No sound. No wind. She stumbled back to the car, started the engine, and checked her USB. The file had changed. New audio. This time, not Caleb. A girl's voice. "We're not asleep. We're just waiting. Someone has to remember. You opened it. You saw." Nora sent the files to Elias. But there was no reply. Only static. Only silence. And the next morning, news broke that a fire had destroyed the local forestry office that housed the original RON plans. Arson. No suspects. No survivors. No records. Again. As if something, someone, was erasing every trace. Nora stared at the news report, then at her phone. The voice echoed again, "We're just waiting. You saw." She packed her things, locked her apartment, and wrote one last note: "If I don't return, the trail does. Follow the hum. Beneath the pines, the silence remembers." If you're listening to the hum too, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Rain came the next morning, soft at first, then harder, as if the sky, too, had grown tired of silence. It slicked the pine bark black and turned the gravel path leading to cabin 6 into a thin trail of reflected light. Nora stood at the tree lean again, soaked to the knees, her satchel cinched shut, the recorder on loop in her jacket pocket, humming that voice again and again: "We're not asleep. We're just waiting. You opened it. You saw." She hadn't heard back from Elias Boone in 3 days. His number rang without tone. His email bounced. His last message was a photo, a blurry screenshot of an old ski mat. But Jeremy was not the key. Jeremy was the lock. The mechanism. The structure that closed around them the moment they followed him off the trail and through the veil that wasn't really fog at all, it was something much older. A veil between time. Between before and after. That night, Nora saw him again. Not Jeremy, exactly, but the version of him that flickered and stuttered when he walked, like film skipped forward and lagged behind. He stood near the old maintenance shed, or what looked like it, though the building itself didn't truly exist in the now. It was a memory, an echo too, barely solid. The door creaked open with no sound. Nora approached slowly, Caleb at her side. Inside, a projector whirred to life. No bulb. No plug. No explanation. Just a flickering image on the far wall, 17 faces. One after the other. Their camp photos. Then medical records. Sleep pattern reports. Then still frames of each child sitting inside the cabin loop, looking out the windows at a world that didn't respond. Then, finally, test logs. Echo subject response degradation, high. Retention of individual awareness, deteriorating. Containment probability, unstable. Recommendation, reboot cycle. Nora stepped back. Her own name flickered across the screen. Not as Nora. As 18B. "You were always part of this," Caleb said, eyes glowing faintly in the light from the projector. "They didn't forget you. You were added later." She tried to speak. Her mouth was too dry. A memory bloomed. She'd been to Camp Redwood. Once. As a kid, she hadn't remembered. Not until now. Not until the loop let her remember. That summer her parents said she'd broken her leg falling from a tree and had to leave camp early. But what if she never did? What if they had pulled her into the loop and then let her go, experiment complete, subject cleared? What if everything since then had been an echo too? "Why did you come back?" Caleb asked. "Because you called me," Nora whispered. "You said you remembered." "I did," he said. "But it wasn't me. It was the loop pretending to be me. Trying to open itself again." He stepped closer. "But now that you're here, it doesn't need me anymore." She blinked. "What?" "It resets when it finds someone new. Someone to remember. Someone to carry it." Nora staggered backward. Caleb smiled, but it wasn't a child's smile anymore. It was ancient. Worn. Tired. And then he vanished. Gone in an instant, like he'd stepped behind a curtain made of nothing. The projector shut off. The woods went black. Behind her, footsteps. Not soft. Not a child. Heavy. Measured. The air thickened. It wasn't Jeremy. It wasn't Caleb. It was something else. A figure. Tall. Unmoving. No face. The one from the children's drawing. The one under the bus. The one they called the listener. And he was listening now. Nora ran. No direction. Just away. But in a loop, there is no away. There is only return. She crashed through underbrush, tore through moss and branches, and found herself, again, at the hatch behind cabin 6. Only this time, it wasn't closed. It was waiting. She dropped into it without hesitation, down the rusted stairwell, through the flickering tunnel, deeper than before, deeper than allowed. The floor gave way. She fell. Hard. Landed on something soft. Her hand pressed into a sleeping bag. And another. And another. A pile of them. 17. Their names stitched on tags. Their belongings. Untouched. Preserved like relics. Caleb's flashlight lay at the center, humming. Buzzing. Then a sound like a heartbeat began. Slow. Deep. Rhythmic. Not hers. Not human. The walls pulsed. She was in the final chamber. Beneath the loop. Beneath even the echo. In the origin point. A voice rose from the walls, not through sound but through thought, like it was inside her teeth. The loop remembers what the world wants to forget. You are the remembering. Nora screamed. No sound came. Her body convulsed. The light burst. And when she opened her eyes, she was alone. On the forest floor. Morning. Real morning. Her satchel beside her. No sign of the tunnel. No hatch. No Caleb. Only her recorder. Still running. With 17 voices whispering at once, you saw us. And one final whisper, then don't let them unsee. Nora opened her eyes to the sky above Camp Redwood and wept. Not out of fear. But out of knowing. Because if she didn't speak, it would all happen again. The veil would reset. And one day, the loop would find another kid. Another hatch. Another cabin 6. Another 17. If you're still listening, comment, like, subscribe, and remember us before we vanish again. Nora didn't return home, not really. Her body left the Redwood perimeter, but her mind, her soul, some unmeasured part of her stayed behind, caught in the breath between seconds. She told people what she had seen. She even filed an official report, handed over voice logs, photos, the sound recordings of the whispers and the faint heartbeat in the soil. And then someone came to visit, someone in a black coat with no badge, no name, just credentials that spoke too loudly in silence. He took her files. He told her it was under federal review. He told her not to speak further for the sake of stability. The next day, the tunnel behind cabin 6 was gone. Bulldozed. Covered. Trees planted. Grass laid. As if it had never been real. And all that remained was her story, her memory, and a single phrase etched on the inside of her tent, echoes never die. She left town soon after. Moved 3 states away. Started over. Changed her name. But still, every night, the whispers came. Not loud. Not violent. But persistent. A litany. A loop. She took to recording herself at night just to prove she wasn't speaking. But the voices never came from her mouth. They came from the space just beneath her bed. From her closet. From the trees outside the new apartment window. Then came the sketches. Unconscious drawings while on the phone, while watching TV, trees with eyes, buses with sealed windows, staircases that led underground and never back. She kept trying to forget. But memory isn't kindness. Sometimes, memory is architecture. And sometimes, people are built from it. It was almost a year later when she got the email. No sender. No subject. Just an image attachment. It was the drawing. The one she found in the Redwood basement. The bus. The forest. The figure with no face. Only now, it had a name written under it. Not the listener. Something older. Something etched in static, Orith. A name without language. A word that made her teeth ache. She clicked the file once more, and her computer died. Permanently. Power supply melted. Tech said they'd never seen anything like it. Days later, her new address was mailed a package. No return info. Inside, 17 cassette tapes, numbered. A player. And a note that simply read, "Play them, or we will be forgotten." She didn't play them. Not at first. But by the third night of dreams, where the kids stood in a circle, holding her hands and repeating the same phrase, she relented. The first tape, static. Then laughter. Then silence. The second, breathing. The third, a child humming. The fourth, screaming. Then silence. The rest she hasn't played. Because she knows. She knows the tapes are not recordings. They are invitations. Entry points. Each one is a tunnel. A loop. A pulse. A door. And doors, once opened, remember the hands that turned their knobs. Nora now lives in a rented cabin near another forest. She doesn't answer the phone. She doesn't go online. But sometimes, hikers find a symbol carved into the trees, an open eye inside a bus window. And every year, on the night of the summer solstice, 17 candles appear outside cabin 6, though no one lights them, and no one is ever seen placing them there. And if you camp there, on that night, and you wake at 3:33 a.m., you might hear footsteps. Small ones. Dozens of them. Moving just outside your tent. You might hear breathing, close, but not hostile. Not angry. Just, waiting. Waiting for you to remember. Because remembering is how the loop feeds. And forgetting is what sets it free. The loop at Camp Redwood was never broken. It was passed on. And you just heard it. So now, whether you want it to or not, whether you believe or not, you carry it. You are the memory. You are the door. And somewhere, under the dirt, behind the trees, beneath the cabins, the ones who never left are listening. You should subscribe before they decide you've heard too much. And whatever you do, don't visit the woods alone. Not anymore.